What's going on, fellas? It is late. I am exhausted, but I decided today I would commit to making the second episode of exercises I think you should probably be doing. Basically, I ran over in the last one how I wanted to make a YouTube series that's a little bit less nuanced, because back in the day when I was new to this, I always wished that someone well-informed, not someone just trying to sell me on something gimmicky, would just tell me, hey, just do this shit. It'll work, right? There's some complex reasons why every now and then it probably wouldn't be the best fit. We can get into a lot more detail about why and when, but I just wish someone would be like, hey, try this out in your program. The percent chance that this works well for you is pretty high. And I got a very positive response to the last one. I take it because while we can all appreciate some nuance, it's sometimes nice to just have an idea, put in our face and say, this exercise, throw it in there as an accessory, see what it does for you. And I would like to provide you the ones that I think have a good shot of, if you stick with it, you do it a couple times a week, you go hard, you're going to notice it helping some other things. Last time we talked about how I feel most programs should contain a unilateral leg exercise, be that either a split squat, a walking lunge, or maybe a single leg press. Today I just want to talk about how most programs should have some vertical pulling present within them. As far as vertical pulling goes, we kind of just have two options, right? We have pull downs and we have pull ups. Those are the only really common ways we're going to be able to work in that vertical plane of pulling. Maybe some other machines, maybe you got a hammer strength, pull down type machine. But for the most part, we're looking at pull ups or like cable pull downs. I know that a lot of people would class chin-ups as a different exercise. Generally speaking, a barbell row, whatever grip you take, it's still a barbell row. So I know chin-ups, lots of people are saying, are a different exercise, yada, yada, yada. So if I slip up, I kind of use them interchangeably. I'll be like, a chin-up is still a pull-up. In my mind, it's just a different grip. So that's kind of the options. We have different grips on the pulley, and we have different grips on the pull-up. And that's how we're probably going to get in our vertical pulling volume. Now, I've always been a big proponent of including some horizontal pulling and pressing and some vertical pulling and pressing. And I find that if we do a bit of these, we get strong in these various planes of movement. That's generally a recipe for fairly healthy shoulders. We don't necessarily need to do all of this rotator cuff isolation, because the rotator cuff is going to be challenged just via pushing and pulling. And if we're pushing and pulling in a variety of planes through a full range of motion with good load selection, our rotator cuffs are going to end up being pretty goddamn strong without any necessary isolation for them, right? So I think that would be part of it, is just including, even if our goals are bench press, I like including a bit of pushing and a bit of pulling in the vertical plane, and I find that is worth its weight in gold in terms of keeping your shoulders healthy. The other thing that we can look at that I think is a big benefit to including some vertical pulling for your back development is that it's going to keep your overhead mobility good. If so, you're someone who's interested in having a good strict press, a good push press, a good log press, a good even clean and jerk, right? We need to have this good overhead position where we're kind of driven back. We're supporting the weight more with our upper back than we are kind of holding it with our front delts and our triceps. And one of the first things we need is good T-spine and lat mobility. And full range of motion, vertical pulling is one of the best ways that we can build in that overhead mobility. If we do each rep, we come all the way to the bottom, we push our head through, we're loading that specific position. And if we load a position, we tend to kind of gain some mobility there. So I'd say benefit number two, aside from being a general good habit for shoulder health, would be that it's going to help us establish or maintain good overhead positions, which is only going to help our pressing. Now, number three, lots of people will find, oh, well, if I do horizontal pulling volume to build up my back, let's say it's for deadlifts that we want to build up our back, or even bench press, they find, oh, well, if I do my horizontal pulling volume, that feels a little bit more relevant to what I'm doing in the deadlift. We're strengthening more of that shortened position of the lats rather than a more lengthened position. I feel like that helps me maintain my position off the floor better for deadlifts. And this is probably true. I think on a set for set basis, you're probably going to notice the barbells, rows you do help your deadlift a little bit more than the vertical pulling. But the nice part about the vertical pulling is it spares our lower back. And that means we can run up a ton of volume. Right? So even with something that's somewhat chest supported, we can still fatigue our spinal erectors a little bit because we all kind of pull up and through at the back, and that is not a problem at all. But we are often limited by the capacity of our spinal erectors, whereas we can kind of fill up the rest of that lat volume with pull-ups completely independent of the spinal erectors. Kind of like how we talked about filling up our leg volume with non-spinally loaded squat pattern movements. We can kind of fill up the rest of that pulling volume with something that does spare our spinal erectors, right? So maybe the meat and, just like the squat, the meat and potatoes would be some kind of free squat. The meat and potatoes here would probably be some horizontal pulling, some rowing, some dumbbell rows, we can also use this to fill up the rest of that capacity of our lats. Now, in the past, I've been a very vocal advocate for maybe, hey, let's use the pull down a little bit more because we have a little bit more precision in loading, right? And that precision in loading will often help people standardize their execution, whereas they kind of need to cheat the pull up a little bit to get her done. And if we can standardize the execution, it might be a little bit better for hypertrophy, or if we have a little bit better loading control, we have a little bit better technique, we can better mirror the back tightness elements of a bench press, and I absolutely stand by those points. But lots of people find it easier to buy into and push really hard when they get some goals as far as weighted pull-ups. So I think that's perfectly valid as well. Chasing some volume PRs is going to absolutely help you put more mass on your upper back. You're going to find that has some beneficial effects for your squat. You're going to find it has lots of beneficial effects for your deadlift, some beneficial effects for your pressing. All around, I think it's a good investment that a lot of people do neglect. I know in the sphere of YouTube, lots of us really like our weighted pull-ups. So you might be well ahead of me on this one, but I do think people get really focused on the squat, bench, deadlift, maybe the overhead press, and they neglect just filling up that upper back volume, and they don't realize, because they haven't done it, how much it can aid you in the progression of your other lifts. So I would absolutely make sure that your program has some kind of vertical pulling in it. You can kind of base the purpose if you're like, oh, I'm just trying to pack mass onto my upper back and strength. I think it's perfectly appropriate to just chase volume PRs on pull-ups, doing somewhere between, I would say, 3 to 5 working sets, between 1 and 3 days per week. As long as we're seeing progression with time, we're kind of hanging out in that right range, we are going to see improved development to our upper back. Or we could select the pull down because we want to mirror kind of that scapular depression and retraction we're looking for on our bench. You find, okay, when I do these, I'm a little bit more skillful at that component of the bench. Plus I'm checking that box for hypertrophy, coming through, getting a stretch at the top of each rep, and that helps to keep my shoulders healthy and mobile and keep a good overhead position. So you can kind of rotate through them as you see fit. I think that both are extremely viable. I don't necessarily think that one is that much better than the other. There's kind of this naturalistic fallacy we have going on where, oh, well, because you're moving your body weight, it's a closed chain movement, and that means it's infinitely better. There's not really a reason why that would be true. Fundamentally, there's not really any reason why a pull-up would be vastly superior to a pull-down, and there's not really a reason that a push-up would be vastly superior to a bench press. I don't think that's necessarily true. And if anything, we're offered better precision of loading on those non-closed chain movements. But that's not to say that there's not a ton of value and they're not damn good to move your body weight through space and get good at it. So I would say that you can move kind of between those freely. I would say if you really feel like you're stalled in the progression of your pull-downs, don't hesitate to rotate to pull-ups for a training cycle or two. Go crazy, push the numbers. It's something you haven't done in a while, so you're probably going to see really fast progress really quickly. But that being said, the other kind of side of the coin applies as well. If you're someone who's been hammering the pull-ups, you're kind of in this little niche of YouTube fitness where everybody says you need to do weighted pull-ups all the time, and you feel like you've kind of gotten to the point where maybe you're getting a little bit marginally better at the pull-ups, but you don't feel like it's translating to anything else. You don't really feel like your upper back is growing. You're kind of at the point where you're like, I feel like what I'm doing isn't building my capacity. I'm getting better at pull-ups, and I'm kind of hyper-specialized. I would suggest you move over to a volume-based approach on the pull-downs. Kind of the same thing between 1 and 3 days per week, anywhere from like 3 to 5 sets, and you're going to derive those benefits just from the novel stimulus. And because for many people this isn't one of our primary performance metrics, we can afford to kind of just abuse that novel stimulus type deal, right? Obviously, if we want to get good at squatting, spending time away from squatting as you get more advanced isn't a great idea. You're not just going to go spend a training cycle of doing nothing but front squats and leg press and come back and have a bigger back squat if you're already a good back squatter. Specificity kind of needs to come up. But if we're just trying to get the effect of the exercise, we can kind of rotate them freely as a bodybuilder would, right? If a bodybuilder, a hack squat's bothering their knees, they don't care how good they are at hack squat. They care about stimulating the muscle. And they know they're going to get a comparable stimulus out of a leg press, out of a pendulum squat, out of a bunch of other options. So they're going to select the one that isn't going to bang them up. So I would say that we can kind of, if we're not using like a weighted pull-up 1RM as one of our things, we can absolutely lean into that rotating between the two, but I would make sure that they're in your program somewhere and enough of them to make sure you're moving forward. That's kind of the big thing. You're like, well, I do a couple pull downs. Well, have you progressed in the last 6 months at them, or are you kind of doing the same thing over and over for a long time? Because to really derive the benefits of an accessory, we should see some progression with time. That is all. Thank you for watching.